Jar of Marble dwellers and Jar of Marble curious. My name is Linda and this is Jar of Marbles. I hope that this finds you well. I am a 60-plus-year-old woman. Look, I'm 61. I'm now going on to 62. And so I like to talk about different things that I've experienced and then sort of flesh them out a little bit in comparison, say, to where we are now, being a mother and a grandmother and a universal citizen. This is something I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to have a podcast. And when I started looking into what was involved, it was like, oh my God, this is never going to happen. But there you go. It did happen. And I'm so glad that you're here. And this week's podcast is called My Life as a Garden. I hope that you enjoy it. And yeah, let's go. My life as a garden. Sometimes in life, it can be difficult to see the road ahead. We just have to know, and we yearn for definite, don't we? And for sureness of outcomes. There is no doubt that this can happen to any of us strivers, to us triers, to us who are aiming for the next thing. When I realise I'm doing some, all of the above, it is always because I've forgotten to trust that life will be whatever the hell it needs to be. And as long as I'm sniffing the wind and taking care of my garden, things seem to trundle along, nicely. Not because I garden and nurture and play music to my garden, but because it's the giving of myself, looking after myself and setting a vibe, music playing, taking delight in new growth, that the other stuff, and there's plenty of other stuff, that fades right out of our minds. I focus. Better than that, it's as though none of it exists. A strong person never has a straightforward past, many twists and turns. Some it would seem we can do without. I recall after finding out some devastating news, it was so terrible, and I looked up to the blue summer sky and thought, how does this help anyone? What am I to do with this? How will this ever help? And many years pass, and eventually you might be able to say that sometimes certain one-off experiences only deepens your resolve, perhaps your compassion, your understanding that sometimes there is nothing to understand, and to leave that place of wondering why. The thing is to just let go and forget it. See, that's the thing. That in itself is a lesson, isn't it, in itself? It deepens you, though, without ever being invited. This ever deepening of ourselves sometimes involves the walking right through a fire that you never lit nor knew of its existence. And now that I am a woman in my 60s, our pal lives in our experiences, no intention of slowing down, but powering forward to enjoy this precious stage of life on purpose, with purpose, purposely. And looking back, many of us have had to teach ourselves, take over from the people who raised us with the tools that they had. We've had to do that wholly and solely under our own tutelage. And it can feel like a rock bottom beginning, which is always a segue to the next thing. I knew I was not supposed to stay at the rock bottom lodge for too long, and I was the only one that could fit through that door of change. We realise at some point, not necessarily in our 60s though, that we have limited and precious time left without being gruesome and morbid. It is well and truly time to normalise those facts. I've been anticipating my end, I don't know, the day I die, for decades. In fact, it's sort of like a family joke. It's sort of a family joke, but it's not a family joke that only I enjoy. So it's sort of a me joke that I enjoy within the family, if you will. I don't get that. No, well, you wouldn't, Bob, so that's okay. So I know it sounds, odd, but that's just the weirdo in me. But it is known about at least. For example, I would say before flying on holiday, if I don't die in a dramatic plane crash, I'll see you in a week. And if I'm late from the supermarket, I've probably been murdered in the egg department. Silence and all that jazz, just that look on my children's faces like... And we're not talking like they're children. We're talking like women in their 20s and 30s. So anyway, this never went down well, and the shocked reaction was fun, but do you know that they have not stopped even being remotely, less mortified, which I find forever amusing and sort of I'm curious about it. It's like, come on, don't you sort of... Anyway, you know what? We won't go there because I know that they'll be listening to this at some point, rolling their eyes and going, really, Mum? Yes, darlings, really. Anyway, that's the thing about possible death, isn't it? I mean, until it is a mere possibility or hanging in the air, we don't think about it. And so joking about it apparently a no-no, which brings me back to dough and why I like to say things like this on occasion. Because, how often have you heard of people saying, if only I could have said goodbye? See, look at me go. I'm giving real opportunity there. Right? Right? I know. Thank you. All right. They're going to be so horrified when they hear this. Oh, well, never mind. But anyway, when I was 10 years old, my parents and my 3 siblings went to Scotland for 3 months. So that meant a wee bit of time off school. We were going over the 12-week period. So yay. And I recall having a pantsuit made for the trip. And I had some knee-high boots to go with it, a bit sort of snazzy if you don't mind. And I had a pale blue Pan Am travel bag, which was also an oversized handbag, and I loved it. While flying, I had hours to observe their air hostesses as they were called at the time. So it was a really long trip, long haul from New Zealand to Scotland. And I just loved their uniforms, so elegant, their lovely hair and perfect makeup. And they was just so lovely to us kids too. And I'd watch their every move with the distributing of the meals and the cups of tea and the pièce de résistance, the overhead speech made by the hostesses at different times with their instructions of various pieces of information. Thank you for flying, Pan Am. We're flying at a height of 33,000 feet and will be airborne in 10 minutes. Until then, please remain in your seats with your seatbelts secure, extinguish all cigarettes, and lunch will be served in 20 minutes. Oh, God, I loved it. And so I was sold. That was it. I shall be an airline hostess and say that speech with the fab hostie outfit. Yes, that will be my career path. I just remember I was 10 years old and I was just on fire. I was so inspired, as I sort of never really thought of anything past as to, what we were having for dinner, let alone a career. So 10 years old and I knew what I was going to be, and I was very sure of this. So next thing, we arrived in Scotland and I loved it there immediately. Everyone spoke like my parents and I understood them. Most of my friends growing up had really struggled understanding my parents, and quite often later, after my friends had left, my parents would say they had no idea what we're saying. And I go, how did you know? Well, they'd just say yes and no to the wrong things, and then I would talk to my friends and they go, I'm sorry, we just have no idea what your mum and dad are saying. Just don't understand a word of them. But anyway, that's right. I used to play interpreter. So you can see really clearly there was the path for me, to be an air hostess. It all sort of started adding up. So here we were in Scotland. My parents hadn't been home for over 10 years and they had needed the trip, as I know Mum had been terribly homesick. So 10 years she'd been really badly homesick, and meanwhile had 4 children. Back in the day, in the 1960s and 70s, travel was really expensive, so she just felt that she couldn't slip away, for any, length of time. But my mother started smoking cigarettes in Scotland. This is one of my memories. I recall the day clearly. Mum had taken us kids to a local park, and once we were there, she gave me money and she asked me to go to the shop and buy her some cigarettes and matches. And I was just really blown away, because I'd never seen my mother smoke. She had never asked me to buy cigarettes. And so anyway, off I trotted and went and got her, cigarettes and matches. And I just remember just sitting there on the park bench with her, watching her peeling the pack open and cautiously, lighting it. And I guess she was looking at me with a little bit of interest too, because she, who had never smoked before, was looking at me, looking at her. And I suppose at that stage my mum would have been about 33 years old and I was 10 and not too far away from turning 11. But anyway, she wasn't a professional smoker. They should tell her she wasn't a professional smoker because she just blew it out. And of course, I was a big expert myself at 10, so we really were quite the pair. So we used to tease her about it for years. But, gradually she did become very professional. So I had heard her say that she wasn't homesick anymore and that she just didn't want to live there, and she couldn't believe it. I remember hearing her say to Dad, as soon as her feet touched the ground, as soon as she arrived in Scotland, she knew that she didn't want to come back home. She had thought all that time that she did, and I understand that. I understand what homesickness is like, and you can build a picture in your mind unless you get the opportunity to go back. And I mean, of course, it could have been a very different story too. They could have arrived and gone, hey, this is where we want to be, because they had been thinking of moving us all there. But no, and now she didn't want to stay 3 months, because that's how long we were going to be away, 12 weeks. She just wanted to cut that time down, but that wasn't going to happen. So anyway, I was 10, did not know the ins and outs of all of this, but I do remember my mum being very sad and deep in contemplation, because, her mum and dad were there, her sister, her brothers, she had reason, to be here or be there rather. And I guess the reality of it was, no, my life isn't here anymore, so to speak. And I really understand that now. But as a child, I was just looking at all of this and taking it all in. And clearly here I am, some 50 years later talking about it. It's kind of wild, isn't it? Anyway, so a few adventures later, it was time for us to go. And as we were landing in Hong Kong, a notable amount of people started to vomit on the plane, a few. And I mean, oh my God, I was just filled with horror. I noticed passengers handing these brown bags that was full of their sick to the air hostesses, who took it kindly from them and disappeared with it. And at that moment, no, I think I'll rethink my air hostess career path, and we'll just leave that one well alone. Oh no, that wasn't for me. So on our way home, we were, heading back to New Zealand. We were going to stop in Hong Kong for a few days. We were visiting my Scottish Auntie Gina and uncle, who he was with the Black Watch there. So we would be staying for a few days. So we were sort of becoming close to the end of our journey. By this stage, we were all looking forward to getting home after 12 weeks out of school. My memories of Hong Kong are a little bit ordinary, in as much as there were high ceilings in the apartment that they lived in, and I had never been in a high-rise before. A 2-story building was about it, and we weren't allowed to drink the tap water. I mean, as a child, not for the first time ever, to be able to drink from a tap or a hose was a complete mystery. It had to be boiled and refrigerated, and you would have to go to the fridge, to pull out a jug and give yourself a glass of water. So, and also, I had never experienced that kind of heat and humidity before, and the fans ran so fast that when my auntie, she was painting my fingernails, the polish all just ran into wrinkles and all these squiggly lines, because, those fans, they were working really hard. And I know for a fact there wasn't air conditioning, but we are talking, where was it? 1972. So, there wasn't air conditioning in this apartment anyway. So I remember staring out the window, and I noticed that there were all these stairs that would just sort of hang on the side of this high rise, and some were attached well and some weren't. And now and then you'd just see someone crawling past your window on the ladders, and you'd look out, and the drop was just unbelievable. And so you just stare at, people sort of just disappearing out of sight. And I just remember thinking these buildings were just out of, they were just wild to me. So in that night, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was really, really thirsty, and I was just, perspiring really heavily. And so I just completely forgot not to drink the tap water and just went straight to the tap and just chugged it on down, went back to bed, and in the morning I woke up and I wasn't very well at all. But I didn't mention I'd drunk the water, because I know there'd probably be hell to pay, so maybe don't mention that. So we went out anyway, the next day, and I was feeling ghastly. So we went to these outdoor markets as an outing, because we were going to fly out that afternoon. So somehow I got separated from the family, and I was in this fish market that had dead, you name it, hanging from the stalls above our heads, and the heat, the smell, oh my God, it was just absolutely terrible. And I was just so lost. And there were a lot of people whining and milling around me, and marketers calling out in high-pitched voices in an unknown language. And I thought, oh my God, I am lost. I didn't recognise, couldn't see anybody I knew. And then there in the distance, I saw my father's toupee. Had to come in handy for something, didn't it? And I ran towards them and was reunited Good thing, though, they hadn't noticed. I don't know whether that's a good thing, but anyway, the thing was they hadn't noticed I was missing. And as usual, we just didn't mention it. And I tell you what, boy, that was a close one. Sometime later, as in decades, I had a short stint working at a major airport company. And while in training, someone asked if many people died on plane trips, as in, people that just got into their seat and just kind of didn't make it to their destination, and how many died and what was protocol. Well, let me tell you, here I am years and years later, still having my mind blown. While it's not a regular thing, it does happen, and I just had never thought of it, until that moment. Well, I guess we all have that in common. None of us are going to get out of this, journey alive, off this planet alive. We just might not be on the planet. You might be on a plane. Anywho, we all will not be here one day, and that alone still puts a little bit of a shiver up my spine. I guess it's because I'm just not ready to go. I mean, but not all of us are when we do go, isn't it? So anyway, that's a little bit redundant, but some folks say that they don't care about dying, nor are they afraid, and I say, bloody good on you. Me? I'm not keen on the subject, but hey, that's just me. So now that we've got that sorted, it creates a segue to next things. And next things can be whatever is next for you. For us, for me, for those that garden. When you have sown seeds, there's both an anticipation and a hope, anticipating the new growth and hoping the seeds aren't duds. Then the day comes and the new spickles of green appear, and it's exciting. It's a bit of a rush. It has to be said that there's a lot of preparation obviously has gone into the soil prior to the seed planting. I relate to the analogy of the preparing of the garden, the watering, the fertilising and the weeding. And when everything is growing, the checking, the wonderfulness of the freshness and the prospect of juicy vegetables, I just find wonderful. Do you know that the United Nations World Population Prospects suggests that current life expectancy in Australia in 2022 of last year was 83.79. So we'll just say 83, 84. In fact, Australia enjoys one of the highest life expectancies in the world, ranking 8th out of 60 countries. That's higher than the UK, which is 81, and the US, which is 79. And so that just sort of led me, obviously, of course, to funeral costs. The basic funeral in the simplest, is the simplest type of funeral and typically includes the essential services. The research found that the average cost of a basic burial in Australia is $8,048, while the average cost of a basic cremation in Australia is $3,108. Now, I don't know if that's, absolutely accurate. There could be someone saying, we paid $5,042.33. And I say, I'm sorry. It's a thing, the whole when you die subject, and your kids don't want you to be cremated, or someone else doesn't like the idea of you being eaten by worms, it is kind of hilarious. Thank you. I know. They're not going to like this. They're going to shake their head at me and just go, Mum, that was just terrible. It is kind of endearing, though, when you have your adult children looking at me in the eye in this case and just going, Mum, you know what you did. You know what you said. And it's, I don't know, they're just lovely moments for me, because it's kind of, in that instance you see their very sincere, their vulnerability, that they're no longer 4 or 5 years old, 10 or 11 or even 20, My youngest daughter is nearly 28 and my eldest daughter is nearly 38. So it's, interesting that they have these reactions to things and to subject like, dying and how you want to be buried, or whether it's going to be cremated or otherwise, because obviously they've not really thought about it for themselves in their own lives. And it is initially, it's like a lot of subjects, when it's a new subject, it can be it can be kind of tricky, because I know the first time I ever had to talk about it or consider it, really I think it was when my husband had stage 3B lung cancer, and he had many challenges ahead of him, and we were in our early 50s, like 51, 50, like really young, really young. Well, compared to now. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all to go, oh, okay, so if this happens, having to put your affairs sort of get them all organised, and then if something does happen, how do you want to, do you want to be buried? And all these questions. And I remember we just sort of fumbled around and over the subject because we hadn't ever talked about it. And I think it's perfectly understandable, when you're approaching a subject like that, and for it to be, oh, okay, never really thought about it. How do I feel about that? So anyway, perhaps this might be, a prompt to talk about it if you have never, or, because we often, make the mistake that, oh, well, I'm only, 25, or I'm only 42. I don't have to think about that. It's like, well, should anything happen, I think at that moment, the ones that really love you really want to honour you in the best way that they can. And so then we started talking about music, for example, and I sort of thought, carrying my coffin through the church with Bad to the Bone by George Thorogood. Again, all the oxygen just sort of left the room. I was sort of thinking it from an event sort of perspective. But anyway, look, it depends on how you feel. And how you feel about it today might be different about how you feel about it in 5 years or a year or even tomorrow. I suppose, you could say in one perspective, that I'm avoiding it. I'm not really. It's just, well, if you're not here, you're not here. And I'm sure someone can choose a nice piece of music, And then I remember saying, after saying, the Georgie Thorogood Bad to the Bone song, and then finish it off with Wind Beneath My Wings, just to really finish everybody off. And again, no, I didn't score any points for that too. I don't know. Do I watch too many movies or something? I don't know. I've always just been like this. I just don't like thinking about things like that. I'm not talking about death per se. Anything really. I just don't really worry about things like that. It's like, well, we'll just see what happens and we'll take it from there. I have endless trust in my daughters. I know they'll throw me a decent bash and I'm not going to be around anyway. Although, will I? You grow up the day you have your first real laugh at yourself. That's a quote by Ethel Barrymore. Isn't it a good one? It's so true. And I think that's what I do. I think that I just have a good laugh at myself. I'm fully aware how it comes across. And I think it's that being irreverent and just like enjoying myself. And the hope is always that someone else will too. It's never to make people feel bad. That's a person's choice, always. But anyway, here we are at the end of another podcast. I am so grateful that you've come along and I hope you've enjoyed my life as a garden, and I hope that life is treating you well. Say good day to the family for me and the pet snail, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye.